Just recently, Willow Creek Community Church, one of the most influential churches in modern evangelical history, celebrated its 50th anniversary. For 5 decades, Willow shaped how the church looks, how it leads, and how it measures success. Through its seeker-sensitive model and its leadership platforms, it became the blueprint for much of the Western church. But as we hit this 50-year milestone, the Willow story is no longer just about influence. It's also about the damage it's done. As we first reported 7 years ago, numerous women have accused Willow Creek founder Bill Hybels of adult clergy sexual abuse or harassment. And sadly, Hybels has never confessed this sin nor asked for forgiveness. And the church has never adequately named the extent of Hybels' abuse nor apologized to the individual women harmed. It did, however, issue a general apology at its 50-year celebration in October.
To the women of those who brought those initial allegations forward, we're sorry. Many of you carried pain for well over a decade, sometimes even decades. And your story wasn't held with care. Your story is initially faced with defensiveness and even dismissiveness. We're sorry.
But damaging in a completely different way was the church model Willow Creek upheld and others replicated, not just nationwide, but worldwide. Though its seeker model was effective in attracting unbelievers to the Lord, data shows it was miserable at making disciples. And isn't that what Jesus commanded the church to do? So why is Willow Creek upheld as a church to be celebrated and emulated? And what is the real story of its 5 decades in existence? Welcome to the Roys Report, a podcast dedicated to reporting the truth and restoring the church. I'm Julie Roys. Joining me today is someone who's done a deep dive into Willow Creek Community Church, its origins, its philosophy of ministry, and its fruit. He's my good friend and Director of Restoration Resources at the Roys Report, Lance Ford. Lance, welcome. Always a pleasure to have you.
Yes, good to be back, Julie.
And Lance, when you think about Willow Creek's legacy at 50 years, what comes to mind first for you?
The thing that I think about is the impact that Willow's had. Most importantly, the impact that most people don't recognize or think about. Willow Creek didn't just build a church, they built a paradigm. And there are a couple of things that stand out about that. First, they reshaped how church looks today in the prevailing model. You could go to just about any city in America and you could throw a dart on the maps that show the churches and go in and you're going to experience the influence of Willow Creek. It's modern. It's what used to be called seeker sensitive, particularly back in the 90s. Very carefully crafted. You even saw that in that clip of the apology regarding the Bill Hybels crisis. It was a very crafted teleprompter statement. This is typical of these Sunday mornings. Very crafted, production driven, rather than really being focused on making disciples of Jesus. And we'll see later on that Willow Creek even self-reported their failure to make disciples, though they continued even at the time to uphold themselves as the predominant voice in the shaping of churches. The second thing was they really reshaped how leadership should function. That it became very centralized, personality-centric, modeled after corporate vision casting, rather than biblical shepherding. And so now, for decades, this became the model that most pastors and church planters were trained to follow up to today.
Well, and in full transparency, 35 years ago, and I can't believe I had to do the math, and I realized it's 35, almost 40 years ago, my husband and I went to Willow Creek Community Church. So I had just graduated from college and my faith was really kind of thin at that point. And we started going to Willow Creek. We went to their midweek services. And it really was at Willow Creek that I began to put my faith back together. And even though I went to a Christian college, I had never heard of Christian apologetics before. And, for those who aren't familiar with that term, I mean, it's just a reasoned approach to the faith. It's a defense of why we believe what we believe. But I needed those answers at that point in my life. And so going to Willow and hearing Christian apologetics was really, really crucial for me as a Christian, but a Christian who, again, was asking questions and not necessarily finding a safe place. And I found Willow was a safe place for unbelievers to ask questions, but it was a safe place for me to ask questions. And so that became really, really crucial in my own spiritual journey. And I will always appreciate Willow Creek for that. And I saw friends of mine become believers. I remember I was in this sales organization between college and grad school. And my boss became a Christian because I invited him to Willow Creek. And that became, a number of spiritual conversations. And he led somebody else, a colleague of mine, to the Lord. And that friend led some people in his family to the Lord. And actually, there was a midweek service where I actually was in a chain reaction where we had my mother who led me to the Lord. And then, we all talked about how, it was this chain reaction of how the gospel was spread. And so that's when I think of Willow Creek, I think of those early days back when I was in my 20s, and I saw the church doing something that I had never seen the church do before. I mean, I had grown up. So we talk about making disciples. I grew up in a church, a small town, lots of great people and mentors in that church. I loved that church, and it discipled me. But my non-Christian friends would never come to that church. And so I grew up thinking kind of the way my parents thought about church was the church that really, or the organization that really did things were like parachurch organizations. Those were the ones that actually reached non-Christians. But the organization that, discipled me was a church. But when I came to Willow Creek, I saw kind of like this parachurch church where this church was doing evangelism on the weekends. And that was something you could invite your friends to who didn't know the Lord. And it was working. And so it was a revolutionary idea of church. And I have to say, like when I first came in, I thought, wow, this is it. Like I really thought this was the model because I saw people coming to the Lord. But I think that's maybe only part of the picture. But, that was revolutionary back in the 1980s when I went. The church started in 1975. Back then, it was really revolutionary. So take us back to kind of those early days and what it was about Willow Creek that really broke completely new ground for the church.
It is crazy to think it was 50 years ago. And so, today, as I said, that you could go into so many churches today and experience what's blossomed out of the Willow Creek model, but all the principles and practices that we see today on Sunday mornings in the prevailing model of the churches and I'm talking about the churches where you walk in, everything's dark, lights, smoke, coming from the stage, all this very concert type of feel. That's now we've got a lot of updates and technology added to it, but it's the same thing that was going on 50 years ago. So the Willow Creek model is a 50-year-old model. And so in 1975, Bill Hybels and his team, they launched Willow Creek in a rented movie theater. A lot of people know that it was the Willow Creek movie theater. That's why it's called Willow Creek, the church is. So their goal was to create a church for people that didn't like church. And they had an avatar that they called Unchurched Harry and Mary. And the idea was this church stripped away all the liturgy, all the pews, the hymns, and anything that they saw as religious baggage that might turn off what they called irreligious people. And so they replaced it with storytelling and contemporary music and drama and this just carefully curated, quote, experience. And it worked. And I should put quotes in worked around the word worked, but people came in droves. Yeah. But the problem was this: from the start, the stage became the center of gravity. And the goal was to make church attractive. It was not to make disciples. Hopefully disciples happened, but that shift has really had enormous consequences on the church today.
Well, and in Willow's defense, I will say they would say that you come on the weekend, that's where you bring your non-Christian friends, but you won't grow unless you come on midweek. You won't grow unless you get in small groups. I mean, they really did pump that. But even, I think what we found out later, and we'll get to that, is that even those who were, 100%, all in, the results weren't what Willow expected. And so I think, we're looking at something in hindsight, and again, hindsight is more 20/20 than when you're doing it. But when Bill came up with this whole philosophy of ministry, if you want to call it that, as I understand, it wasn't, something, I mean, there was Dr. Gilbert Bilzekian, who was a professor at Trinity at the time, and now we know not only was Bill accused of sexual harassment and clergy sexual abuse, but so was Dr. Bilzekian. I knew Dr. Bilzekian. I was a student at Wheaton College. He was my professor in one of my classes, and he was flirtatious. And we all said, oh, well, he's French.
He's French.
That was the saying all the time.
Yep.
He's French. I guess if you're French, you're allowed to do that. I thought it was odd, but I was like, okay, well, he's French, But he did have this idea based on Acts 2:42-47, that the church all came together and they broke bread together, and then the Lord added daily to their number those who were being saved. This was something that really captured Bill's imagination. I think it captured a lot of ours as we were going to Willow Creek. So there was some biblical basis. It wasn't like completely divorced from that. But at the same time, the real inspiration for what Bill did, and this is where I thought, wow, this is great. Like, we can take the best of the Bible, but then we can take it from the business world, right? I mean, it wasn't just something he got from Scripture. This was Bill Hybels, a man who was, his dad was a successful, I think, produce. He was in the produce business in Michigan, and he learned a lot from his dad, but he also learned a lot from a guy by the name of Peter Drucker, too. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. And Peter Drucker is known as the father of modern day management. And Peter Drucker's influence has been immeasurable in the church. And once again, this is a name that most people in the pews, they've never heard of. A lot of people that today, they are eating from the plates that were created by a lot of these people that they've never heard of. But Peter Drucker had a huge influence on the church. He had a huge influence on Bob Buford, the founder of Leadership Network out of Dallas, who subsequently had a huge influence on just dozens and dozens of I could drop names right now and everybody would recognize these famous pastors. They all come this lineage. But there was another person that also had a huge influence on Bill Hybels, and this was Robert Schuller from Crystal Cathedral fame. And so Robert Schuller famously planted a church in Garden Grove, California in 1955 in a drive-in movie theater. And he started preaching from the top of the concession stand and in this movie drive-in movie theater. And so he started developing all these different ideas that became what we call the seeker-sensitive church. And one of those ideas was even to go around and knock on doors and poll people, ask them what they wanted from church. Well, this is the exact thing that not only did Bill Hybels do, but Rick Warren did it too. And my research, I'm working on the longest ever PhD research in the history of mankind, by the way. If I ever finish this, it'll be nice. But So this is all part of what I started working on even a few years ago. What I found really interesting was that Hybels early on was taking teams to learn from Robert Schuller. And then when Robert Schuller's name started becoming sullied a bit because of his ties to Norman Vincent Peale and others, then Willow Creek did its best to scrub its history and Bill Hybels and the early team's connection with Robert Schuller and the influence from Robert Schuller. But it's there. It's very factual. So there was a combination of these two sources, Robert Schuller and the seeker-sensitive church models and ideology, plus Peter Drucker and the leadership ideology and management theory. So that's where we get the seeker, quote, and then a lot of people call it now the attractional church model, and we should talk about that. But then it also, with the leadership stuff, this is where leadership started overriding serving, in my opinion. And so pastors became CEOs rather than shepherds as part of this big influence.
Well, and Vonda Dyer is a friend of mine. She worked at Willow Creek for a very long time as their production director. And she told me, Julie, it was like leadership was an idol at Willow Creek. Everything was about leadership. Leadership was the driving force. And yeah, that became kind of the tail that wags the dog, according to some of those that I've spoken with. But Willow, again, this took off. I mean, the church exploded, and it was no longer just a very large church, and the megachurch was just kind of, this idea of a megachurch was just getting started, but it became a movement. And I remember this because everybody was coming to Willow Creek to learn how to do church. And I remember my sister at one point, she's a children's director at a pretty large church, and she came to Willow because her church wanted her to learn from Willow and how they were doing things. And she was appalled by what they were saying. She was like, Julie, they say we have to entertain all the kids, and it's a crime if the kids are ever bored in church. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but it became like you have to do dramas for kids. You have to do music for kids. I mean, that attractional model now became something that we had to do in the children's church because we got to attract them, and it's got to be exciting and everything else. And boy, I can remember church not always being that exciting to me as a kid, but I mean, I think that's okay because the Christian life isn't just about excitement and bells and whistles. But again, everybody was coming to Willow. Everybody was trying to learn from them.
So yeah, it's really right. In 1992, they launched the Willow Creek Association, and this allowed churches to replicate Willow's model. And by the mid-90s, there were thousands of pastors flying to suburban Chicago, to Barrington, Illinois, every year to learn how to build a Willow church. Guess what? I was one of them. And I had planted a church. We had planted a church in the mid-90s in the northwest suburbs of St. Louis, Missouri. And our church it took off. I mean, we started with a dozen people, and it had taken off, got to several hundred. Everything was clicking. We were planting other churches. And we started loading up vanfuls of our leaders once or twice a year for several years to go to Barrington and to learn more about how to make this cool church. But by 1998, there was something that was really dying in me. And even though everything looked great, I'm being invited to go speak and tell others how to do what we were doing, but something was dying in me, and I literally went to Lake of the Ozarks, my mother and father-in-law's cabin, for a few days just to seek the Lord, going, why do I feel something's wrong on the inside? And the Lord just really took me to task, took me to the woodshed, and basically the bottom line was, he said, you're building a church, and I never asked you to build a church. I asked you to make disciples, and you're a church builder. You're not making disciples. And at the same time, in fact, I know you've got the Dallas Willard's his best book, in my opinion, The Divine Conspiracy, wrote it in 1998. It came out right at the same time, and it was a godsend for me because he put words in Scripture to what I was feeling. He gave me language. And the thing that just stopped me for days was when he said in his book, the failure to make disciples is the elephant in the room of the church. And man, I was like, I am guilty as charged. And so we went back and really just started changing things in our church. And our church really slowed down in its growth, but it became stronger because we started focusing on making disciples. Well, the Willow Creek Association was really focused on leadership and really focused on how to replicate the Willow model. And so by the year 2000, this blueprint was fully exported. And it was Sunday-centric, it was performance-driven, and it was deeply shaped by really the American corporate imagination. And all you have to do is just look at some of the names of people that were influential in those conferences to know it was very corporate. And so even if you didn't call yourself a Willow Church, the odds were that you were following their playbook in some way. Like I said earlier, the odds are that you're still following their playbook, whether you know it or not.
Wow. I can remember that too. I remember going to little tiny churches that were all Willow Creek wannabes. Like when you would go to a town and you'd go visit a church.
Yeah.
And it was funny because I'd come from Willow and I could see the same language, the same everything. And I was like, wow. And somehow it just seemed hokier when it was done, on a smaller level, And,
yeah.
But I saw that. And yet you saw so many churches, again, growing. We see mega churches, they're popping up a lot more. They're growing. So we're seeing all this explosion of growth and impact. And I remember thinking like, wow, Christians used to be so uncool when I was a kid. And now we've got the coolest churches around. And, this was kind of the mentality back then. And yet, when you look at the actual numbers of how many people were actually going to church in America, there wasn't a growth, was there?
No. And largely what was happening and still happening in America is that we are just rearranging the sheep. And so we're taking sheep from a lot of small sheep sheds and we're putting them in larger sheep sheds. In fact, I would go as far to say that there are a lot of well-known pastors that people call them pastors, but they're not shepherds, they're ranchers. And so surprisingly, in 1970, there were about 50 what we would call megachurches in the U.S. And back then, what was called a megachurch was really about 1,000 or more. Well, that definition's changed today. A megachurch is usually considered a church of 2,000 or more. And so presently, there's almost 2,000 megachurches today. But during this same period, from 1970 to now, weekly church attendance dropped from about 38.5% to about 28%. So we've seen a 27% decline. So we've built bigger buildings, we've drawn bigger crowds, but we did not build deeper disciples. And so that's the paradox of the Willow model.
And I remember when we went to Willow, and even after we left Willow, we would notice this in the Chicagoland area because, it's such a prominent church, that not only did Willow have a big front door, it had a very large back door. But I thought at the time that might not be a bad thing because Willow Creek evangelizes people, right? It brings them into the church, and then another church might do the discipleship. And maybe that's a decent model because these other churches weren't doing a great job of evangelism. So maybe this is the way it works. But the problem was it's the Walmart effect, right? When Walmart comes in, all of these mom and pop shops often close down because they can't compete.
Yeah.
And the same thing happened in the Chicago area where a lot of these faithful churches could not compete with the glitz. And again, when you're putting on a show like that, I remember somebody saying to me, he was pastor of a Willow wannabe kind of church, and he's like, He's like, yeah, like if you want to reach this generation of people, you need a ton of programming. That takes a ton of staff, because the staff were doing all the jobs. They were doing everything. And so the sheep, those of us that are supposed to use our gifts, they're supposed to grow by using our gifts. Unless you are on staff, you often couldn't do that. And so again, this discipleship and the discipleship making, part of training up people. Like if you're a resident, if you want to become a doctor, you have to be a resident for a while and you have to practice. And it's a little bit, it's a little bit scary. In fact, it's even scarier that they still call doctors once they become full doctors that they practice, But
it is funny.
Just a joke. My dad was a doctor, but you have to allow a certain amount of mess, which is interesting. We went then to a Vineyard church, which used to have a statement that we're committed to a messy church, because we knew that when people started ministries, as God led them, they wouldn't do it perfectly, but there was a certain kind of beauty, and things just got started, and the Lord moved, and the Spirit moved, and then they would clean it up afterwards, was kind of the way we talked about it. But I liked that, because there was this sense. In fact, John Wimber used to have a statement, the kingdom of God, the great thing about the kingdom of God is that everybody gets to play. And that really is. It's everybody is a part of it. It's not the professionalization of church. It's a family. But yeah, this whole attractional model really seemed to create baby Christians, just not growing. And yet, I think we thought it was effective until 2007. And that's when Willow Creek did something kind of bold. Like, they actually said, hey, we're going to take a look and see, are we being effective? And they came out with this reveal study where they actually looked at their body, and those who were even coming to the midweek, coming to the small groups, are they really getting discipled? And what they found was pretty surprising. And I remember this because I was at the time at the Moody Bible Institute with Moody Radio. And again, the flagship station of Moody Radio was right there in Chicago, and Willow Creek was such a force here. And when it came out, and it's like, oh, dang, Willow's not working. That made a pretty large impression. And we were talking about it a lot on talk radio, Christian talk radio here in Chicago. So, tell us a little bit more about what the results were, and let's dig into those a little bit.
Obviously, this is a generalization, but this is their report. This is not our report, so we're just parroting what the report was. So the basics of the report said that when people came to the Lord at Willow and started developing their faith, at some point, not too far down their journey, they left Willow so that they could keep growing, so that they could keep developing spiritual maturity, because they were getting stagnated at Willow. So the Reveal report showed that church activity did not equal spiritual maturity. And so it was the most committed believers that were the least satisfied. And so a huge segment said they were stalled in their spiritual growth, and the system was producing attenders, but it wasn't producing disciples. And even Bill Hybels admitted publicly, he said, we made a mistake. Okay, 2007, started in 75, 85, 95, 2000, 32 years later, millions of dollars spent on conferences. Hey, we owe you one, buddy. My bad, but we made a mistake. But it wasn't just a programming glitch. It was a fundamental design flaw. And they had built this beautiful machine for attracting people, but it did not feed them.
Well, and here's the thing. When that came out, I didn't see Willow saying, we got to scrap the model. Like, we got to really rethink things. And in fact, I couldn't believe this at the time. They made it into a program and videos, and there was like the Reveal curriculum. Like, I don't even know exactly what they were trying to teach, but it was like, what? Like, it was stunning to me. It was like, let's just keep marketing what we're doing. And I mean, maybe there were some, I mean, do you know what changes exactly were made to Willow? Because I can say from the outside, and again, I wasn't on the inside, but I didn't see any fundamental changes. I saw kind of the same thing.
Yeah, I don't think there were any real changes on what they were doing on the weekends. They were trying to add things to make up the gap. But fundamentally, the problem is look, Sunday morning, the main time when the church gets together, it's for the church. It's for the people of God. It's not to be primarily an evangelistic effort. And thus is the problem, is that in this attractional model, in the seeker model, once again, the idea was to create this phenomenal experience so that people that were starting to be drawn by God and seeking God would come. The problem is we made the wrong person the seeker. Jesus said, I came to seek and save the lost. So you and I, as believers, we're to be the seekers. We are the ones that are to go out and to find people that God is moving in their hearts and the Lord is drawing them to them. We're to go out and seek them. They shouldn't have to be seeking us and crossing these cultural boundaries to come into this place we call church. And so it's a fundamental design flaw. It's a paradigmatic flaw, I would say. And it's had a huge influence. And once again, all the way to today, it has this huge influence. And so today we are, as you said earlier, Julie, we're creating consumers. And the prevailing model of the church today is that it's become a vendor of religious goods and services. And so we make people consumers of this religious stuff that we have. And if we had Scott McKnight right here, he would say that the big problem is that we've preached this limited gospel just primarily about salvation, of whether you're going to hell or going to heaven. And he'll say we've missed the mark, which I totally agree with him. And because we've not preached the gospel of the kingdom of heaven, which is a total change in your ethics and your ethos, even your personal economics. So that's what we're getting on Sunday mornings. We're getting this little truncated Twitter gospel, I call it. You know, it's this little tweeted gospel, 140 characters or less.
And yet, again, like we were saying, Willow Creek, by the time, 2007 rolls around, they have become the gold standard. Everybody's coming to them to see how to do church. And by this time, they have something called the Global Leadership Summit. And this became, massive, like hundreds of thousands of people attending this summit once a year with some of the biggest names coming in. And a lot of this was founded on a leadership model that Bill Hybels had, but also John Maxwell, the leadership guru. He, with Bill, was in the very beginnings of this Global Leadership Summit. Talk a little bit about that, which it's still running, the Global Leadership Summit, and it's still touting, hundreds of thousands of people. Interestingly, I thought we really need to do a story on this, but do you know where a lot of the growth for the Global Leadership Summit has been coming from, where some of the growth is coming for their sites? Because they've lost a lot of churches. Prisons. Yeah. They're doing the Global Leadership Summit in prisons.
Seriously, I did not know that.
Oh yeah,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's almost.
Well, you've got a captive audience, don't you? I'm sorry, I couldn't help it, but
yeah. Well, that's exactly right. I'm like, really?
Wow.
This is where we're going for leaders for the church, to prisons? I'm not saying that some of them couldn't be, but I
hadn't heard that.
It's dumbfounding. Yeah.
So this is where Willow moved from being a church growth model to a global leadership engine when they started the Global Leadership Summit. And so it became, for many pastors, a yearly pilgrimage. It was the most important leadership event of the year. And at its peak, I believe in around 2015, there were over 600 satellite locations in the U.S., besides the big event in Barrington, Illinois. So there were more than 260,000 leaders, 250,000 leaders, and over 15,000 churches that participated in this global leadership summit every year. And here's the great spiritual leaders that they brought in. So you know why this was such a spiritual event. So there was Jack Welch from GE, also known as Neutron Jack. There was Carly Fiorina, Bill Clinton, another great spiritual leader, Colin Powell, Tony Blair, Malcolm Gladwell, Jim
Bono.
Collins, Bono. Yep. And so there were voices from corporate America and Fortune 500 top leaders, voices from politics. I know Condoleezza Rice was there, he spoke there. People from entertainment, best-selling authors. And so Bill Hybels himself said, we try to find people with the most thoughtful ideas about leadership and ask them to spread their expertise over our audience. And so this was in his words. He called it a blend of high-impact, God-honoring messages with savvy, street smart, don't spiritualize everything lessons from business. And they poured it straight into the church. And so this has amalgamated now for about 3 decades now. We've had this so that now the word leadership has just almost completely erased the word servantship in the minds and even the language and the dialogue of most pastors and church staff members today. People don't talk about being shepherds and being ministers. They talk about being leaders. And a big part of that has come from Willow's influence, as you said, Julie, and they're still doing it. I mean, the week after Bill Hybels publicly went down in 2018, just within a few days, the big leadership summit was scheduled, and the show went on.
The show did go on, and it continues to go on, which dumbfounds me because, one, we have Bill Hybels admitting in 2007, we made a mistake. This isn't working. We have Willow Creek itself with Bill Hybels, just an epic explosion, right? I mean, like that church, what happened because of his moral failure, but it wasn't just his moral failure. And this is what irritates me so much about the fact that Willow has never described the abuse of power, the way he punished people who didn't fall in line, the things that he did to the women so they wouldn't talk. I mean, those things, and the fact that the Willow Creek board allowed him to do it. And this is the epidemic problem throughout America right now. As I report on church after church after church, this is coming, and it's grown, it's infested the church, and we're still doing it. Like the GLS just goes on like we haven't noticed that this. Why would we want to replicate the leadership of a man who in such spectacular fashion failed? I don't understand it. I'm still trying to put my mind around it.
No, I'm dumbfounded by it too, Julie. And think about it. Let's really don't lose this fact. Willow Creek was known for two big things, and they put all their eggs in these baskets. One was what church should look like on Sunday. After 32 years, they self-reported and said, we got it wrong, but they didn't change it. And by then, the damage had already been done. It was in the bloodstream of the church. And that's why we see what we see today in these attractional model of churches. So they got that wrong. The other thing that they said, hey, we're the best at was leadership. And like you just said, they were an abject failure in leadership. Their elders didn't know what to do after that crisis. Well, before that crisis, They weren't leading. They were following a one-man rule, a hierarchical system of Bill Hybels. So they were an abject failure in the two things that they're most famous for. And once again, it still continues to go on. The beat goes on. And the answer seems to be, well, yeah, we messed that leadership up. Let's just do it better. Well, that's crazy. That's like saying, like a company saying, hey, we're losing, 30 cents on every widget we sell, but we're going to make it up in quantity. It's insane.
It is insane. And it wasn't just Willow either. It was a lot of other churches that were doing sort of this corporate CEO mentality. Some of them weren't. For example, Mars Hill Church, Mark Driscoll. In a way, it was the anti-attractional model in the sense that it wasn't seeker sensitive. In fact, Mark Driscoll was kind of in your face and would preach like over hour-long sermons. So in that way, it wasn't. But it had that same CEO model, that same let's build this church as big as we possibly can. In fact, Mark had, it never was big enough for Mark. And he had just aspirations for bigger and bigger and bigger. It's imploded in spectacular fashion. Talk about, some of the key churches that adopted this model and what happened to them. I mean, are we looking at Willow Creek being an anomaly, or is this more of the pattern?
It's pretty much the pattern. I mean, there's no doubt it's pretty much the pattern, because you can see that, churches from Gateway, I mean, still this same style. Life Church, which is huge. Now, there's not been an implosion with Greg Eschel and Life Church, but we see so many of these other churches that have gone to Hillsong, fabulously a show on Sunday mornings. I mean, just look at what happened with Carl Lentz in Hillsong, New York, and there's been a lot of other Hillsong churches that have really dissolved and gone down. And so this is all part of just baptizing corporate leadership culture and piping it straight into the bloodstream of the church. And so, Harvard Business School wrote a case study on Willow Creek, and then the author of that case study, Jim Mulatto, became the head of the Willow Creek Association. Bob Buford, the founder of Leadership Network, once said that Willow Creek is the most influential Protestant church in the world. And he said one might even say the most influential church in the world, save for the Vatican. And you know what? I don't think he was exaggerating, because Willow really did redefine what it meant to lead a church. And pastors all over America followed that model to the T. And that model was this CEO-style pastoring model.
Well, and I want to play a clip from a GLS where Bill Hybels said something that's pretty shocking when you hear it. Yet at the same time, till he makes the gaffe that he does, I'm not going to tell you what the gaffe is, but up until that point, tell me if you're not moved, because this man had just an ability. When I hear this, that same desire to want to sign up for whatever he's selling, I can feel it. Mm-hmm. I can feel it. But this, what he expresses here is quite breathtaking, and I think we need to revisit it.
I got seized by the beauty and power and potential of what a church could become. And I walked away from the well laid out script for my life and swore to myself I would not go to my grave without at least trying to see if what happened in Acts chapter 2 could be replicated in the 20th century. Willow has to reach its full potential because it's the hope of the world. Each of its attenders really matters. Young or old, rich or poor, black or white, doesn't. Each member really matters. So we got to help every member find his or her spiritual gift, because there's so much at stake. We got to have people with leadership gifts step up and lead all over the church. People with teaching gifts, teach. People with administration gifts, administrating. People with shepherding gifts, they got to start shepherding, because there's so much at stake. People with gifts of giving need to start stepping it up and resourcing this church. It's the hope of the world. We got to grow up our young people in a manner that invites them to be a part of the hope of the world in a way that's understandable and meaningful to them at a young age, so they'll want to be a part of the faith community for the rest of their life. And we got to help every single church we possibly can, wherever it's located, whatever denomination, in whatever country, in whatever culture, because it's the hope of the world.
Wow. Again, I mean, nobody can deliver the way Bill Hybels delivers. I mean, when I would hear him, and this just reminded me of it, it like brings it back. Like, I wanted to sign up for definitely wanted to sign up for everything. Like, and the gospel is worth signing up for. The gospel is worth spending our life on. But what he says at the end, that Willow Creek is the hope of the world. He just got a little off.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
Just a little bit off there. And this was a statement that so many pastors, and I hear pastors parrot it all the time. The church, the local church, and they'll say the local church is the hope of the world. And because this comes straight from Bill Hybels, and there he says, he's talking to his people, and he's saying, man, we're the hope of the world. Well, I'll run through a wall with you for that then. If we're the hope of the world.
Yeah.
All hope is lost if the church goes down. Well, first off, the scripture never says that the church is the hope of the world. And Jesus is the hope of the world. It says that the people of God are the light of the world. But these are not mere semantics. The church Jesus is the hope of the world. But when you as a pastor are being taught this, just pounded into you, conference after conference, book after book, then you better build a heck of a church. You better darn well make a big old church, because you're the hope of your city. You're the local church is the hope of the world. And so it's error and in a great measure to make these type of statements that become paradigms and become theory and become doctrine inside people.
Wow. And I think I know I've said that before, and yet honestly, it's hopeful to me that the church is not the hope of the world, just in the sense that what we're seeing in the church right now is a very dark time for the church. And we need to remember that Jesus is the hope of the world. The church is disappointed an awful lot of us. An awful lot of us are disillusioned and hurt by what we've seen in the church. And I think it's important for us to come back to saying, Jesus is the hope of the world. We got to get back to Jesus as a church so that we can connect to the hope of the world. But yeah, it's funny how things that sound so good and just are off by a little bit, yet that little bit is so incredibly profound. And so that's what we see here. And if you could just break down for us maybe 4 or 5 things that when you look to this model and what was held up as this is what a church has to be, what they were selling, what the church really took hold of, and what we need to change.
Yeah, so once again, this was being sold decades ago, and so I would ask our listeners to when you hear this little bullet list I'm just going to throw out, see if this does not sound very familiar with what you're involved in right now. Willow Creek created the structure and these principles that are very much alive with its flavor in the churches today. So first off, stage is at the center of everything. Mm-hmm. So it's the organizing principle that draws everybody. So celebrity, there's a celebrity at the top. This is our guy, and it usually is a guy, right? Mm-hmm. Brand is the core identity. So there's a lot about brand and branding, and hierarchical leadership structures form and lead the thing. And measurable success is defined by expansion, constantly growing, Healthy things grow. You hear all these little things.
Yeah.
Healthy things grow. Healthy things grow. Every time I hear that, I think, well, is that really true? Have you ever heard of obesity? Have you ever heard of a tumor?
I'm thinking of mold grows. I mean, a lot of bad things.
Yeah,
grow
there's
too.
a lot of things, that I want to be healthy, but I don't want to grow right now. I'm in a place I don't want to grow, right? So, but anyway, these memes, these super memes get into people and they just start believing it's true. But those principles, those old principles of Willow are still very much alive and still very much driving the church today.
So we've alluded to this, but let's talk a little bit about this leadership model that Willow had, that it exported, how it collapsed with Bill Hybels. And also, when that happened, how that exposed, in many ways, the fault lines that were already present, but it really became very, very clear when these women came forward. And I remember this I remember this so clearly, reading in 2018, these women coming forward with allegations. And I knew some of these women, and they were not lightweights. Like, these were godly women who would not be lying. And it just was absolutely stunning, and yet so hard to believe, because, even though at this point in my life, I would say I had gotten to the point where I didn't really believe in the Willow model anymore, but I still thought Bill Hybels was an extraordinary Christian leader. So this was just absolutely stunning to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're talking about 2018 when, as you said, there were multiple women that came forward with allegations against Bill Hybels. And what was exposed wasn't just personal sin. It was a leadership structure that was designed to protect power. And so the elders didn't act like shepherds. They acted like executives. And this was the very thing that they had been trained to do. And this is why I'm always talking about systems, Julie, because every system is perfectly designed to get the results it does. And that's why these elders didn't act like shepherds. They acted like executives, because that's the way they'd been trained. And so they minimized, they deflected, they protected the brand. And the system they exported to the world, the same one Harvard praised, this was the same system that shielded their very own abuse and failed to protect the flock.
And they brought in a PR executive to help them manage it. And I mean, and this is the same PR executive, Mark DeMoss, who was brought in, and so many other, Ravi Zacharias was brought in for Thomas White at Cedarville University when they had a crisis, was brought in with Gospel for Asia when they had to pay $34 million for defrauding. And of course, they never admitted they defrauded their donors, but you don't pay $34 million to donors unless you've done something wrong. Again, this whole system, just like the corporations, we're just going to cover our butts, CYA. It's no longer about protecting the mission of the church. It's about protecting the brand. And the brand is, as Mark Driscoll said, I am the brand, right? The brand is the celebrity pastor, whoever that is. And so, friends, when we're looking at what's happening, this is the thing, and it took me a while to see this. I have to say, in 2018, when Bill Hybels went down, when I blew the whistle on Moody, when, on the heels of that, I saw James McDonald, what he was doing at Harvest Bible Chapel, and it was pastor after pastor, megachurch after megachurch, Ravi Zacharias, and I thought it was just going to be a few bad apples, and then it was like an aha moment when I realized, and it really was your talk. I think what was that, 2022? So just 3 years ago when
23.
Was it 23? When it just crystallized, when you did that talk, it's the system, stupid. And it was like, it gave me language. It's not that I hadn't seen that,
Sure.
but there was something when you gave that language that it's the system, then again, it was like a light bulb went on. And again, we have seen this played out in church after church after church.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the DNA, and that DNA is everywhere, folks. It's the same architecture. A stage replaces the Bible. A charismatic leader replaces shared discernment. An elder board functions as this corporate shield, and the brand becomes the center of gravity in these churches. And so, a crisis will expose the fault lines. And this isn't a series of isolated implosions that we've seen. It's a systemic model failing in real time right before our eyes. And yet it continues. And this is why I have challenged through my social media and even through letters to some of the people that I know that are leading the largest conferences and largest church planting conferences in the world today. I've challenged them saying, you're continuing to perpetuate this leadership system. You don't acknowledge there's a problem, and you just keep selling it. And it sells like hotcakes.
It's interesting that we're having this discussion. It's about 2 weeks since our little house church did a retreat. And we were discussing leadership, which has been somewhat controversial within even our house church. And at the very beginning, this one of our members who put together the study, he put up 2 pictures of churches. One was a church in Bangladesh that he had visited, a house church. And you see people gathered. Some are praying, some are studying the scripture together, but it just seemed, you could just sense they're all working, like there's like this community coming together to discern together, to learn together, to pray. And this is a persecuted church. I mean, this is a church under incredible pressure. And then he showed a picture of, what we're used to, the pastor up on stage, and we're seeing the back of the heads of, dozens of people. And we just started reflecting on what do you see in these 2 pictures? And this has made me not just go and say, I think what I've experienced, what I've seen in the past, 10 years or so, it's made me rethink church, even as we do it in the West. Like all of the things that we're doing with church, is that really the biblical way to do it? Is having one person dispense a lecture to us, is that really the best way to learn scripture? I mean, don't we learn that that's like one of the least effective ways? Just pedagogically, someone preaching at you, someone lecturing isn't the best way to learn. I mean, it's okay for conferences and things like that, but I mean, on a day-to-day basis, gathering together, how much time do we even pray together in church services these days? In some churches, the prayer is basically just a little something we say at the beginning and then it's over. Everything we're doing with church, I just feel like we need to rethink. We need to really rethink. And instead, Willow is getting up at 50 years and celebrating. And I'm like, celebrating what exactly? I mean, I'm not saying there's not good things that have happened there and are happening there. You cannot remove the work of the Spirit from his people. But at the same time, friends, think of what you're doing. Is this really the way to do church?
Yeah, it's, the thing is that everything is so highly produced. It's overly produced. Everything is scripted. Everything's perfected. And then everything is presented. And that's just not a family. That's not the way a family works. That's not the way the family operates. I remember just kind of like you were talking about that experience of the man sharing about their church and how that they were doing church. Did you say Papua New Guinea?
No, Bangladesh.
Or Bangladesh. And there was a time when I was really going through just the Lord was, this is even years after that experience where I'd mentioned back in the mid-90s. This was the mid-2000s, and I was totally going in a total paradigm shift of just a lot of things that you just said, Julie. And I was sitting in a church service where I was on staff at this. I'd left the church that I'd planted and pastored for 10 years, and I was running a large church planting organization out of a large church in Texas. And one Sunday morning, I'm sitting in the crowd, and I'm sitting, in the stadium seats, and just in a blink of an eye like that, it's almost like an out of body experience of like, what are we doing here? What is this? It was like I'd never been there before. It was this real wild experience I had with the Lord. And it was just like he gave me just like this moment of fresh eyes, almost as if I had been a early church, let's say 80, 90 member. And all of a sudden I got transported to the 21st century and placed in a church service and was going, what the heck is this? It was that bizarre and it was that alien to what I was feeling. It was this crazy experience. And I think that's exactly what would happen if you dropped the Apostle Paul or Peter or John and said, hey, you want to come to church with me Sunday? Oh, heck yeah. Can't wait. And he would go, what is this?
Yeah.
They wouldn't recognize it. It's just not built for it. And so this is why when we read the scripture and it says, when you come together, everybody have a psalm, everybody have a scripture, everybody have a, because it's participatory. But just like you said, it's a glorified TED Talk today. That's what we're getting. And there's no scholar by any imagination that would even feign to make an argument that what we have today on Sunday looks remotely close to the idea of what the early church gathering was all about. And, and the thing about it, I think, Julie, that a lot of the young people today intuitively are recognizing this. And so this model of church today that we have, we're seeing, as we mentioned earlier, that the trends are declining. The Willow Creek, once again, a 50-year model, it was built for boomers. And so, and at that time, you had around 40% of boomers attending church. Now we have about 30% boomers attending. Gen X, about 20% of Gen Xers. And Gen Xers are getting pretty old now. The millennials are under 20% of millennials attend church. Gen Z, it's around 15% or less. And that's where it gets scary, because the seeker-driven corporate leadership model might have worked for boomers. It really didn't, because even Willow admitted it didn't. But it's certainly not working for their grandchildren.
Yeah.
These kids are not impressed with our branding. They want substance. They want the stuff.
Yeah. And they want community. I saw it with my son when he came back to this area after being gone for a while and wanted to meet some people his own age, wanted to get plugged in. And he goes to a megachurch because he figures, hey, there's a lot of people there and I'll meet a lot of folks. And literally, he couldn't believe it. These meetings were somebody getting up and it's, the aspiring pastor, and they put him in with the young adults so that he can, practice on them like they're a bunch of guinea pigs. And that's what church is. That's what this young adult, and they weren't spending any time during their meetings really getting to know each other. And he was just so disappointed in that. And yet he went to another church. They're doing the same thing with their young adults. And it's like, if we keep doing this, we're just going to miss them. I mean, they want real fellowship. They want real teaching. They want to grow. And I do think that the ground is ripe right now. Like, the time is ripe for something new to grow in its place. And I hope that that's what we'll get to through all this.
Yeah, I think that there is going to be a demand for a change, and hopefully that happens. But the problem about this model is, and we've mentioned some of the names, the Driscolls, the Grishels and Lentz and Stephen Furtick. See, when the face of the church becomes the face of a man, then the vision and the face of Jesus just gets blurred out. And so the bridegroom gets replaced by the brand. And so Paul warned about this over 2,000 years ago in Corinth, by saying, hey, some of you are going around saying, I follow Apollos, I follow Paul, I'll follow Peter. And he's like, stop this nonsense. We are mere men. You got to follow Jesus. But we're watching this stuff, roll out on a global scale. And I've just... with the recent Cracker Barrel, fiasco, I couldn't help. I think in metaphors. And so, I got to thinking, Cracker Barrel, they try this rebranding, they try this new logo, they try this new look, but the customers weren't fooled. And the problem was not the rocking chairs, it was the food. And it wasn't the branding, it was the biscuits, okay? So the same thing has happened to the American church today. We changed the signage, we changed the fonts, we changed the stage design, but we didn't fix the meal. And people are not walking away because they don't like pews, they're walking away because they're hungry. And the bread of life is not being served at the center anymore. And so the church is not to be a vendor of religious goods and services for consumers. It's not to be a restaurant where we eat and leave. And I used to tell church planters this when I was training church planters. I said, quit trying to build a cool restaurant in town. Make a culinary arts school where you're feeding people and you're teaching people how to feed themselves and to feed others. That's what we should be doing, and helping people bring others to the table of the Lord. And so the seeker movement, in which Willow Creek led the way, no doubt, they stripped away the symbols, the decor, in order to appeal to irreligious people. And what happened is they just lost the plot. The church is not an event. It's a people sent into the cracks and the crevices, of culture. And so we're to make disciples who make disciples that influence culture in the places that people live, work, and play and hang out. And, when we do that, churches evolve, churches spring up. But we don't start by trying to church people. We don't start by trying to church people, okay? We disciple people and they evolve into the church. But I really believe we've missed the plot in a lot of this.
Well, Lance, I really appreciate you taking the time to help us go through all of this history with Willow Creek, but also so that we can learn from history. Because if you don't learn from history, you're destined to repeat it. And that's why I think these conversations matter. We need to get back to being the bride. We need to get back to being about Jesus and about his presence. And we need the church to be reformed. And yet, when you look throughout history, so many times when the church is at its darkest is when something new grows. And so I'm hopeful and I'm praying and I'm seeing it. Like, I'm seeing it in our little community here. We had 45 people crammed into our house this past week, and it was life. And we had friends of ours, neighbors of ours, come for the first time to visit our church. And they're not non-Christians, they're church people. But they were like, man, like, we really like this. Like, I saw my friend today, several days after church, and she's like, Julie, I really mean, we really like that. That was so refreshing. And they're like, their preteen and teenage sons liked it. And that's a pretty hard crowd to gather. But they really liked it. And and that just excites me. It excites me what the Lord is doing in our midst here, but what I know he's doing elsewhere, and I know there's people listening right now that are like hungry and saying, man, I wish we would do something here. I would say, do it. Do it. Don't wait for permission. Just do it. Start gathering. Start meeting with other like-minded believers. If you have some other church refugees where you are, just do it. And for those who are leading churches, man, dream together about what the church is supposed to be. Listen to the Holy Spirit. But again, Lance, I'm just so grateful. You have helped me think about church in new ways and think about leadership in new ways. And for Willow Creek, what would you say? Because I know there's going to be people who are attending Willow Creek who will listen to this podcast, or even who are leaders at Willow Creek. What would you say? Like, if they were here, what would you say to them about what they're doing?
Yeah, I would say, first off, is that I absolutely believe by far the majority of people in those churches, they're there for the right reasons. Mm-hmm. And some of them, they've just never known anything different, but you really are hungry for Jesus. And so the good news is this, that Jesus is still the head of his church. And he said the gates of hell will not prevail against what he's building. He's never built a church that the gates of hell have prevailed against. And he hasn't given into a brand. Jesus is the brand. And so he calls us back to himself. And so I'd encourage you, always look to Jesus. He is the author and the finisher of the faith and your faith. And he is the hope of the world. So he calls us to his table, to his presence. And that's always the way of the cross. And so, as Julie said, I would invite you, even if you are involved in one of these prevailing models of church or Willow Creek itself, you have a table in your house. You have neighbors. You have friends. I would invite them. I would start fellowshipping and get the succulence of that fellowship that no church service can ever duplicate, much less replace. And so we can trade branding for bread, and we can find our way back to the center.
Amen. Well, Lance, thank you so much. Really appreciate you, brother. And it's been great talking to you.
Enjoyed it. Thanks, Julie.
Thanks for watching The Roys Report, a podcast dedicated to reporting the truth and restoring the church. I'm Julie Roys. And just a quick reminder that The Roys Report is listener supported. So if you appreciate these podcasts and want them to continue, would you please consider donating to The Roys Report? To give, just go to julieroys.com/donate. That's julieroys.com/donate. Also, please subscribe to The Roys Report on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. That way, you'll never miss an episode. And while you're at it, I'd really appreciate it if you'd help us spread the word about the podcast by leaving a review. And then, please share the podcast on social media so more people can hear about this great content. Again, thanks so much for watching. Hope you were blessed and encouraged.
I've never seen anything like this in my lifetime.
We need to be talking about spiritual abuse and religious trauma.
This is a place where it's safe for those who have been hurt in churches. It is also a place for people to learn more about how to respond to those situations, and it is much needed.
Walking into the room, even taking the platform today, felt so safe. There was no nerves, there was no anything. There is an atmosphere of support and camaraderie and love that's here.
I think that it's really become kind of a refuge. It's become a green pasture for people to come find one another. And so many times there's a solace. There is a restoration just in finding someone else that's experienced what you've experienced.
To know that there are people from all over the country, all over the world, who have experienced these same things, and they're uniting in Christ for healing, and I just think it's a beautiful experience.
It's not that we don't love the church, it's actually that we do love the church very, very much. And that's why we're having these kinds of conversations. It makes me feel less alone when I can talk with someone who's had a shared experience like that.
It was so cool to see, the room is packed and folks are eager to engage. They're encouraged, but they're also encouraging one another. And I believe that this is so good because the need is so great.
This conference is not only for those who've been victimized and hurt, but it is for people who want to be the answer now to what, sadly, the church in the last 30 to 40 years has covered up. And those who want to be on the cutting edge of how God is moving to vindicate, to show his justice, to bring his healing.
I just so believe in the power of story, and we need to unite. And so I just would welcome any survivor to come and know that you will be loved, you will be heard, you will be seen, and this is just a safe place for all of us.
We celebrate what God is doing. We celebrate that those that have been hurt and wounded by the church, that there's a place that they can come that's safe, and they can find healing, and they can find community, and they can be ministered to. We celebrate that. It is so amazing. And at the same time, we grieve that, right? I mean, how sad is it that we need to have a conference for people who have been wounded by the very place, the very institution that should be ministering healing to them?